I've got some big shoes to follow after listening to Seb's presentation. It was really interesting. I've made some notes. Okay, hi everybody. My name's Lucy. My background is an applied practitioner, very similar to Seb. My background started as a physiologist. I'm a certified or a UKSA accredited strength and conditioning coach. I spent the last 4 years working down at Canterbury Rugby Club and through the Saracens pathway. So for me as a female in a male-dominated sport has been key. That is my background. I used to play rugby for England age groups, under 19 and under 20. I'm a proud girl from Folkestone. That's my home club. Anyone from Folkestone in the audience? Yes, okay. I haven't been there for a couple of years, I'm really sorry. So that's my background. No, you're fine. Anymore? No, you come in. So, this presentation is a little bit away from the norm. In the last couple of years, this has really become an area that Sport England, UK Sports Aid, so some of the best organisations in this country that ultimately look at how we are looking after anybody who is participating in sport in this nation. What are we doing to ensure that they have lifelong participation in that sporting landscape? So, as Alistair was referring to, there's a lot of youngsters that don't make it all the way to the top. And even if they do, they've then got to contend with injuries, expected changes, unexpected changes, often what we term transitions. They have to go through injury, family setbacks, personal crisis. They have to balance a lot of other skills, and then they have to start approach things like thinking about retirement and things like that. And quite often we leave a lot of young people, and even sort of players in their mid-20s to late 20s, often extremely lost, going into a completely different lifestyle. So we're going to look into today what is happening in other sports, what's currently the new area, and what is happening from the top in this country down. Dual career is in its very early stages of research, and effectively this has come about from the Duty of Care in Sport review by Tanny Gray-Thompson in 2017. They wrote a paper which basically said, how can we improve the welfare and well-being that we are delivering as coaches and as national sporting bodies to our youngsters that are going through these pathways from grassroots level all the way through into elite. So what are we doing? Because there's acknowledgements that there are big gaps with how we are looking after these young players currently, and how can we ensure we're doing it. So this is us. I've kind of whizzed through it. I work down at the university. I'm a full-time lecturer, but as part of that I have to do research. So we work for a range of clients, including the FA, UK Sports coaching, you name it. We actually do a lot of research from the big organisations looking at what they're doing effectively and analysing nationwide projects. So it's not really too important, but it shows you the breadth of who we have to work with from the people who then go on to inform policy. So we often go into the communities, look at what these national projects are doing, look at how NGBs are operating, and then feed back up so they can look at redistributing the funding, re-looking at their strategies that hopefully then come back down and inform the pathway and what happens. So, how many of you are in rugby clubs that work with around 12 to 14-year-olds? Show of hands so I can gauge the audience. Okay, 12 to 14. Okay, 14s to 16s? 16s to 18s? Okay, and then anyone sort of got your progression into your men's game, I suppose. So do we actually have pure men's stuff here as well? Okay, so we've got a real breadth that we're going to talk about today then, and hopefully, if I can just provide as much insight as possible, please come and talk to me about the finer points in the infrastructure. So I run the dual career provision at the university. We have 8 sports scholar students who are student rugby players based at Canterbury Rugby Club. One of my jobs is to make sure that not only do we look after and partner with Canterbury as well as we can and other rugby club sports scholar students, but the other part of my role is to make sure that the education side and their wider skills in terms of employability and enterprise are as good as they can be, so when they come out of university we're optimising their rugby experience, but also them as a wider person so they can be more successful in whatever they choose to do. So I will try and relate it as far down the chain to under 12s and under 14s as well, so you can take something from this. So, as I mentioned before, dual career should be seen as enabling the individual to not just fulfil what they want to achieve in sport and their sporting goals, but also from an educational and a wider societal and social impact. We want to be able to make sure that if they don't make it through that system, we are giving them the best possible lifelong skills for learning. So, I want you to discuss, just turn to people next to you, I want you to have a little chat about what you think at your stage in your pathway with the types of young people you work with. What do you think dual career looks like for them? So what do you think you should be doing with them? I just want you to have a little chat and then we can open up the discussion. Just a couple of minutes. So at your stage. You think dual career looks like in your bit? Have you got any show of hands, or can anyone just sort of tell me what you think about what dual career looks like for you and your age groups? Yep. Sorry.
I think for us, we have a lot of boys and girls sort of in 14, 16 actually.
Okay.
And I think a lot of them will be undertaking sort of mock GCSEs in school, maybe having like career advisors come in and talk to them about what they want to do as a career.
Yep.
There'll be a lot of sort of pressure socially, so they might not necessarily want to go rugby on Sunday, they might want to go to their friends to try and keep up with their friends.
So there are definitely things that you have noted as a coach.
I coach 3 to 6 year olds, but
okay.
Obviously quite involved with the other coaches.
Okay.
And I just feel that there'll be a lot of insecurities sort of picking up.
Around that, okay.
Around all those issues, sorry.
No, that's perfect. We're going to discuss some of those and some national research that I'm doing, and then obviously later on in the presentation we're going to actually go through what we are doing in NGBs from the top down, hopefully messages that you can take from that. Anyone else?
Well, quite a wide range of 67s to under 16s.
Okay,
but,
yeah.
I think the sort of thing we're talking about is more about encouraging the kids to be able to, in different aspects from those ages, talk about what they've done today and what they've got out of it.
Yep.
And obviously, from my age group, what you're really trying to spot there is, for the 16s, 17s, 18s, is who's got confidence and will get up and say stuff, and anyone who isn't, you've got to try and find a way of encouraging them to get out and talk more, because it's a skill they can use for
perfect. And we're going to be talking about developing that, which links nicely into Seb stuff as well, about player onus and putting the responsibilities back on the players as well, for them to take ownership. If they have an increased perception that their beliefs and their input is actually being valued, that undoubtedly increases that circle of self-confidence, which I have no doubt potentially would even feed back into the physical performance side of things, let alone even them thinking about being more confident as a general person in life. Perfect. That's later in the presentation too. Anyone else got any input from it? Yep.
Well, honestly, it's exhausting.
What, dual career?
Mentally, to have two careers, to always be moving forward, to be able to, I think, from my perspective, my child, I want them to be able to pay a mortgage, family, as well as those other priorities of enjoying the sport and having a career
and doing that.
at the same time.
Do you know, that brings us perfectly on to our next task, and I thought I'd front load it because the rest of this afterwards is going to be a bit more intense. I want you guys to do what I first do. So I'm a TAS delivery site lead, and TAS is has anyone heard of TAS before? It's a Sport England organisation. It sits right underneath Sport England, and we look after across the nation, so it's driven on a national scale, anyone who is potentially going to be going to the Olympics and Paralympic Games. So we've got a lot of young GB sailors, GB athletics, we've got women's sevens, rugby players, you name it. We look after a group of those at the institution. One of the first things I do is a life wheel. And I thought, what better way, when they arrive on my doorstep, I need to figure out really quickly, and they range from 16 to 22 years old. Some are really confident, some aren't. Some have really extroverted personalities, some don't. They're on all different phases. They come from different sort of socioeconomic backgrounds. I have to literally look at that person and think, right, what's the best way I can sit down and interact and just understand where they are coming from, so I can get a really good gauge of how I build their support network in the year at the institution to enable them to thrive in their rugby. I'm going back to rugby because it's my sport, but it's okay. You're all in the audience, so it's fine. But how can they thrive in their sport and in education whilst I'm there, and try and make them a bit of a better person whilst they're with us too? You're all going to do one of these. Is everyone happy with that? If there's anything really confidential and you're really not happy with the sporting part of your life or your well-being or your finance, lie when you're on the sheet in front of people. I really don't mind, okay? Absolutely fine. But when you go home, really think about this. It's a thinking-based tool, and I want you to think, okay, when I have the start of the players at the club at the start of the year, like August, pre-season, even just sort of fitting this in, and even doing this in your head as opposed to getting them sat down, is a really good place to start to understand the players in front of you and what they perceive a lot of their things are that they are balancing, because this changes. This is a fluctuating process as well, but it's incredibly important, and I'm going to show you case studies later about rugby players and Olympic level athletes that we have been supporting for a number of years, and it shows their pathway with having these things in place. So, I didn't anticipate we'd be in an elevated room. I just want you guys to sort of break out. We're going to sort of spend 5-10 minutes on this. Group out into little circles for me. I'm going to come around with paper, free pens. Rugby people, you love free stuff. So get yourself into little circles for me. At the back, if you're still happy to do it and face one another, I want you to think about your life. I didn't actually say the task, did I? Sorry, give me 2 seconds. I didn't explain the circle very well, the task. Around the circle, you will see it is split into a number of factors that we perceive that an everyday person, an athlete in particular, has to balance above and beyond the normal population who don't do a high level of sport. You're going to rate yourself about what you think or how you currently feel about those areas. So what do you think you're really thriving and doing well at, and what are you happy with, okay? So I want you to mainly think, what am I doing well at? How am I going to give that? So 0 is going to be a poor, 10, you're excellent, you're happy with it, you're doing well at it, you're succeeding, you feel like you're balancing that aspect of your life well. You can colour it in however you want, make it look pretty. This is what's going to be handed out. So I've got these as an example, but there are loads of spare sheets. You might have to draw your own circle, I'm afraid, and just rank it. So let's get these out to everybody. So if you put yourself in small groups, 5 minutes. What did you think of the lifestyle wheel? I'm filling it out from your perspective. What did you think? Any thoughts on it? Okay, right. So, you are grown adults, and already you're looking at your own wheel and thinking, if I was just generally to use this as a gauge right now at this moment in my life, I'd fill mine out and I'm definitely getting some stuff wrong. Imagine now, put yourself in the shoes of your young players. The really young players under 10s, arguably as a parent, you have a huge influence over their life. But when we're starting to talk about 12, 13, 14, if I was an athlete in that talent path at the age of 14, 15 right now, when I have those EPDG players and boys turn up at our door for strength and conditioning, I'm already thinking, how am I going to behave in my practice and my role in managing our university system? How am I going to behave to enable that 14 and 15-year-old to get the best possible progression? So if they're only with me for 3 years and they don't get offered a contract, what have I given them that's above and beyond their sporting side of things? So I will regularly use that, A, to gauge where they are and their perceptions of themselves. I had a lot of questions actually about the interests and hobbies section of that wheel, the interests and given activities. Basically means hobbies. So one of the big things I was sort of saying a minute ago is a lot of students, when we come in, we know that they have a huge sporting identity. They don't really have their own identity as a person. And what we do know is the ability for somebody to go on, get a job, an apprenticeship, go to uni, get in a good position in order to generate income above and beyond their rugby, for example. If they don't really have their own sense of identity other than being away from the sports context, we know that's going to hold them back and that's going to limit them. So that's, when we talk about that hobbies section, I asked them, for example, well, what was the last book you read that's not sports related or that's not a biography about rugby? Not that there's a problem with that, but when was the last time you did something? Do you play a guitar? Do you do anything that's a little bit different? And quite often we have some athletes that don't have anything in that section. So we just want to try and make sure that when they're with us, we're broadening their horizons on those things. So, these are all the potential, or some of the potential lifestyle demands that are faced on your athletes at any one time, or your young players. That can be everything, okay, from simple things that they are talking about. So if you've got them to design their own wheel and think about 8 things that they thought were demanding in terms of balancing their sport and their education, they potentially might come up with all these different things. They literally have their homework, their recovery, times that they need to be sleeping. They're having a lot of time spent travelling in cars, okay? They've got all these additional pressures and a lot of other things they have to contend with, including social media now, which they spend a lot of time on. So, when we look at the transitions of athletes, and this gives us a little bit more of a background, this is one of the main models now that we look at in terms of understanding all the different factors that influence on our young athletes. This is a model by Wileman and Laverley. So what it does is it shows you obviously around from the ages of 10 all the way up to 35. We sort of have where they are in their development phase in terms of their athletic potential, ranging from that very first start, the initiation, all the way up through to when they potentially master their sport, go on to compete, professional standards, Olympic level, whatever that may be. Underneath, we obviously have this sort of the psychological level. So effectively, where are they in that maturation phase in terms of childhood, puberty, adolescence, then becoming an adult? Underneath that, we have that psychosocial level. So what we were talking about, and think about where you're positioned in the room in terms of, at the early childhood stage, parents, siblings and peers are going to be the most influential people in those social circles. Okay, so think about your groups, and then I want you to start delving in later on when we know that this is the case, thinking about what that looks like at your club, and then we can think about how to apply it and maybe think about doing things a bit differently, or what you're doing really well. Then coaches start to become more important. Even peers start to then appear above, with the coaches above the influence of the parents, especially within a club-based setting. Then it moves on to the coach taking a real predominant source of importance when we go from later in that development phase up through to the mastery. So all of a sudden the coaching aspect in that model of an athlete's career becomes really, really important, okay? When we then go down to the academic level, it's pretty self-explanatory. And when I had an interview with Don Barrell from the RFU last week over the telephone, again, he's saying, Lucy, the pathways are still the same. We still rely on a traditional school method at the moment in this country, which is where our young athletes go through. So that traditional school model is still where all your athletes are going through in order to go through primary, secondary school, and they'll either go on to apprenticeships, higher education, hopefully become a contracted player at a club. But they follow that traditional pathway, unlike other sports, which can follow really obscure educational routes. And then lastly, that financial aspect. So in this room, we're probably not going to talk about much funding that your athletes get in terms of from the national governing bodies. It is funded by you. It's funded by coaches' free time, parents' money for travel, and we're having a conversation here about the finance. How many of you know how to access additional grants and funding from Kent County Council or organisations to help your clubs if you do find that finance is an issue for your players? Has anyone thought or looked to do that? Yeah? Show of hands? Okay. So there's all sorts of routes that you can look down. How did you do yours?
Well, it's not so good these days, or a few.
Okay. Okay. So there's definitely ways to look at this. So a number one thing that I say to the athletes that walk through our door to help them go through developing a dual career is look at the Kent Fans scheme. So that automatically, anyone who falls of a certain county level criteria in particular sports, there's a certain number of places I believe for each sport, but anyone who fulfills a certain level of criteria can get free gym access at certain gyms in the county. Number one, knowing that these things are there and these things link up. Looking at grant-based funding options as well to really look at working on opening up options at your clubs for workshops and bits and pieces like that and getting people to come in and speak. You can look at grants from like the big lottery funding, for example. So there are loads of things out there in terms of what you can apply for that extra money if you're finding funding a little bit short for your clubs. So dual career is really important ultimately because your young athletes are going to be experiencing higher standards of training than your regular kids that just go to school and don't have that commitment. Effectively, as they go through your pathway, which we'll go through numbers in a second, they are going to be contending with a change of emotions, a changing pressures that are really quite fluctuating at various stages in that component when they are trying to develop when they're at secondary school, which is a key phase for making sure that they want to continue with rugby, that they don't drop out. We want to make sure they're extremely motivated still. The changes in the situations potentially, okay, in terms of if they suddenly realise that they actually can't quite balance those two things really well, balancing their education, their lifestyle outside of sport and their sport, leads them to situations of high stress, getting stressed out, overtraining, burning out, increased risk of injuries is a really big one, and also having premature dropout completely from their sport. How many times do you see that potentially in your clubs over the years? Have you seen youngsters go through a youth setting and then 16 disappear? You can be honest, because it is on camera though. Do you see it? You must see it. I see it all the time. So it's what are we doing for all those young players? Sport England have got an active nation strategy that they released in 2015, and we are saying what are we doing in the sport, in all these different sports to keep those players in. So now we're going to sort of move towards that a little bit more. So when things don't go to plan, this is Laura Muir. For those of you who are interested in athletics, she is what I consider to be a true dual career athlete at the top of her game. She managed to look at her whole lifestyle in advance and constantly reflect upon it, and she adapted her competitions and her training in order to go and compete at various games whilst spending 7 years trying to pass to become a vet. Okay, so she, for me, is dual career at the top of her game in her sport, faced a lot of injuries, but she's also had to juggle doing something that's incredibly demanding and very unusual in order to get where she is. Then on the other side of the story, you've got Gail Ems. Gail Ems is multiple Olympic medalist, right at the top of her sport in badminton. She recently has been on social media and produced a lot of work and opinions based on the fact how she has suffered a lot of mental health based problems. She has come out of her sport, she retired, she has nothing there. She drives around in a battered, I think she said like a 2000 plate Honda or something. She literally has to scrimp and scrape in order to go on a basic holiday, and I think it's still like, you know, just down the road from where she lives. She's really spoken about her ongoing struggles and her lack of support with coming out of a system and coping with that, and she feels like if she had a better chance at balancing that dual career option, where would she be now? So she hit a real high, and now she feels as if she doesn't really have many options there for her, okay? And think about how many young athletes in your age groups potentially, where this might not, it's not the equivalent of the level, but think about what it means to them currently in your sporting pathway. They get to 16, 17, 18. How many hearts do you see being broken because they are not offered a contract by the time they get there? It happens a lot, okay? They might not make it all the way through the system to a championship team, a Nat 1, even possibly maybe a Nat 2. So what systems are being put in place now? Think about that equivalent feeling that your youngsters at your clubs might have. So, the academy pathway as it is, if we just concentrate on the triangle on the left, effectively in the DPP in this country, you've got around 10,000 13 to 16-year-olds as we speak, so that's this year. When we move up to more the PDG level, which is what we can term the talent pathway in the rugby union, so when you sort of sit at the DPP level, that's still just considered your participation. When you move up to the PDG and the EPDG, so the player development groups and the elite player development groups, that's when we really start, that's when I would start saying, and the RFU, that's a talented athlete level. That number then drops down to around 700, and that's nationwide. That's a pretty big drop already. I don't mean to sound doom and gloom, by the way. This will pick up, I promise. Then, when they go off to the Wellington Festival, okay, that number goes down again. So those players that are based in those elite level and the highlighted players, that number then goes down again to 420, okay? And then, typically, depending on what the different Premiership clubs have to offer at that time, of those individuals who are around 17, 18 years old that go off to Wellington, when it comes to contract points, around 60 to 65 contracts are offered per year at Premiership clubs. So when you look at the changes in the access to the pathway, and it's the same, in fact it's worse for other sports, British athletics, nightmare, there's actually no plan there whatsoever. The RFU has a nice structured process, but I just sort of wanted to highlight, look at that rate and change of numbers and think about how many individuals you still have on that really talented aspect of that pathway, but potentially this is why the education and the wider factors to ensure they stay in rugby and to ensure they build as a wider person beyond the sport, or really use the sport to help them progress in the rest of their career, is so incredibly important. So, this is something we're doing at the moment. I'll brush through this really quickly, but I want to look at the lessons that we can learn from this. So, this is the first bit in this country. It's a dual career, and the research in this area is really, really new. So somebody identified from government level and the EU Commission basically said we are not looking our youngsters from grassroots all the way up to make sure that they have a really good career, whatever that might be. So, TAS, which is a Sport England funded organisation, have said, right, we're going to make all the different colleges, or we're going to ask all the different colleges and sixth form centres in England to become dual career accredited. And what they mean by that is these colleges and institutions basically are saying, right, these are all the different types of academic flexibility offers we can offer the talented athletes who turn up at our doorstep. So I've been travelling around the country, going to all of these initial schools and colleges. Most of them sports specialist ones have jumped on the bandwagon because they want to say, hey, athletes, rugby players in particular, if you want to come here and you want to make sure that you get the most out of your sport, the best out of your sport and the best out of your education side of things, this is what we do here to support you. So they kind of really show that bigger picture. So this has only been going for around 18 months, so it's just to show you how new this sort of scheme is. There are not many places in Kent, not many institutions, schools or colleges that are currently part of this. Up north and in the Midlands, it's really sort of flowing. So what we need to be sure here is, those of you who potentially work in schools or are linked to partnership schools, my take-home message is keep an eye out for this in future. Hopefully some schools should start to actually acknowledge it, and a lot of schools have already got this in place. They offer really good academic flexibility options. But as a coach, I think it's really important, and as a parent, that you understand, well, what are the options? What are good places for my kids and my players to go to right now? What are they actually doing in their school structure? So we'll go into a bit more detail. So, our ongoing research has found a few themes, and the ones in purple I think are really specific to the players. So what we're finding, first of all, is that ability to network. The actual players themselves are finding it really useful speaking to the other players and finding that group sense of identity, okay? They're finding it's really good in understanding and seeing how other young athletes in their sports are actually progressing. So how they're using social media to better what they're doing. How do they work with their coaches when they're at college and when they're trying to get messages to them when they go away and compete. How are the rugby ones, for example, optimising the training that they're doing at college in conjunction with the coaching staff that they have outside. So having that ability to network within the schools and the colleges is really important for the young athletes. How many of you work closely as coaches with schools or things like that? Okay, so we got some show of hands. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about more of that in the future. But this seems to really be a way for the schools to drive forward and for you guys to be involved in that school setting. This group sense of identity as well is when they're on these TAS dual career programs within the institution, having that identity, it really allows them to feel more confident about the fact that there are a group of them in a similar position on their pathway. So think about how your youngsters feel within their club setting, potentially. A variety of different schools, a variety of of different academic and levels. So having the ability for them to talk to one another and understand what options they're taking for their GCSEs, where they're potentially looking to go to college, seeing that bigger picture is really important, okay? And then what we do have though is there's a ripple down effect, which is really important. So what we're actually finding is if you can take a lot of these messages that you're learning from here, so from today about your anti-doping, from performance analysis, if you can filter those down as soon as you can and understand, okay, well, what are the key messages that you can use that are appropriate for your under 12s? What are the key appropriate messages for under 14s? If you can actually filter those down, this is the stage where you guys are really important at this level to get those messages through and use the role models from above. So I'm hopefully going to talk about some role models that I've identified, and I use these throughout our university policy. So when our new students come in, I show them all the things that our young athletes, all different types of athletes, have done really well. This is how they've done it. This is how they've managed to balance their education, their sport, and everything else they do. So they get really good ideas about how they can move forward. So, if we go straight forward to this bit, this is what our dual career athlete looks like in an institution. So Charlie is one example, okay? So he studied for his A-levels whilst he actually was competing in the Saracens Academy. So this is Charlie Watson. And for the first time this year, he obviously has pulled on the full shirt. He was a contracted-based player. So he's also managed to secure a place at Cambridge University, but he's been really encouraged to actually still hold that place, but whilst he's in the academy, give that rugby a shot. So for now, he's prioritising his rugby. But what we did throughout that pathway to enable him to do that was pivotal. So from the age of 14 all the way through to 18, Saracens worked incredibly closely with the school, and then also us as staff in the EPDG. That was really important. We look at Dan, for example, who's one of our students at the university down at Christchurch. Oh yeah? So, yeah, that's right. Okay, so literally Dan's based at the university. So this year he was represented England counties for the first time. When we look at him in a particular example for how we support him in a dual career setting, what we want to do is make sure that when he had some pinch points in the academic year, we wanted to be aware of those so we could really make sure that we planned his schedule around him. And one of the first places we start with is at the start of the year, we identify his goals, what he's looking to achieve, when are his academic deadlines, when do all those things fit. So as coaches, I would do that at the start of the year with a lifestyle wheel as well. So I'd work out, okay, so when are the academic pinch points for your students? When have you got any big competitions, if you do have any? And you can work backwards from there to really talk to your player to understand when they're going to feel stressed, when they feel different. So you can really actually make sure that at certain times you're helping to manage their time as well. And then in a different case study, we have Olympic level athletes, for example. So for her, we have to think of stuff that's really outside the box and stuff that is happening right now at the higher levels of the RFU pathway for the players in the EPDG and in the senior academies. We actually do things called negotiated learning plans, where we physically have to sit down and actually we do have the luxury where we can change her schedule and we can look at altering her educational deadlines to fit around her major strategic competitions. And that is something that happens in the RFU higher up the pathways. So I'm going to flick back. I went straight to the case studies. So what we do know for your young athletes is it's really important to help them understand how to manage their own time, how to take ownership of their dual career, and it's also really important for us to understand about their career planning, them being emotionally aware of their own emotions, and also their ability to adapt to situations, okay? So what we do know is that student athletes who understand how to optimise their sport and their study, those are the increasingly responsible ones. So how can you make your young athletes more responsible? Any suggestions? Anything that you do in your practice to make your athletes more responsible and more aware?
Delegate roles.
Okay. Is that just within rugby?
Yeah.
Okay.
Talk less during training.
Okay.
Get them to the question, get set the question and get them to figure it out themselves.
Yeah. Any others?
Give them responsibility.
Yeah.
So essentially, like, captain, vice captain,
okay. It's almost like a sport education coaching model, like looking at various roles.
Responsibility without something personal. Like,
okay.
Simple things like washing up dishes, stuff like chores, sort of thing. There's a lot of responsibility for that.
Okay. Cool. Do you think there's a way that maybe, thinking about what Seb and the nutritionist were saying earlier, do you think there are certain things that you could ask your athletes to take responsibility for in those particular areas, in terms of organising the group that gives them wider skills that benefit? So do you think maybe you could put some of them in charge of creating and setting up the WhatsApp group and making specific code of conduct details with how they then use it as a group to get messages across? Do you think some of them you could ask to actually take some video footage and do some mini clips if they have interest? Do you think that's something at certain age groups? Do you think you can judge if you can put some sort of responsibility on a player? Any thoughts? Okay, so maybe that's something you can already think about starting to integrate in terms of building that skill set for the older ones. So just think about what's appropriate, how much you can give them. Huh?
It's very hard.
Yeah, or in what way?
To get by. I tried it last year, and there's like loads of red tape.
Okay.
From safeguarding officers and all the small business, but there's a chap that was interested in doing sports analysis. So I got him in touch with someone that works at Opta.
Yeah.
And also got him to speak to my DOR and using it. I thought it was it.
Yeah.
And he like really benefited in his AS.
Okay. So
it's really hard work.
So you're saying because of the video aspect of things, you'd struggle to allow that person to analyse the video clips and report back to the rest of them. Okay, it might be worth sort of, if that's just a 16-year-old thing, it might be worth looking into that. So those of you with older players, you might be able to pull sort of your 16 to 19-year-olds into that to be able to contribute more, especially those that you might have who are in apprenticeships or or in higher education. Perhaps those age groups, that's more in particular. What we did find, what has been found as well from the research, is that individual sports athletes generally have much higher motivation to succeed in all those areas of their life than team sports athletes. Now, that's really pivotal for us. We're in a team sport with your rugby. What it tends to show is that team sports athletes, generally speaking, we need to give them more guidance, okay? So, how it tends to do that, and this is a very new area, so please bear it in mind, there's a More Me Too campaign that's run by the English Institute of Sport. Go onto their website, see how the English Institute of Sport are currently sort of supporting that lifestyle demand. But then there's more research about, basically, this is the sort of thing we offer at university level. So we actually talk to our students and do workshops with our psychologists on introduction to like what stress is, how do we manage it better. So stress doesn't typically have to mean a mental health disorder. Stress is something, it's a reaction to something that we're not particularly used to. We all experience stress, possibly on a day-to-day basis. How can we get our young people to acknowledge what it is and respond appropriately? So that's number one, we address that first of all. We get them to think about coping strategies and how to deal with problems a lot sooner. And then we get them to sort of really think about their personal goals that they want to. Now, at the start of your season, you can get your athletes to think about that, and then you can reflect on that partway through the year. We all have goals. We should have goals, short-term, medium, hopefully some sort of vague idea of long-term. But in this athletic population, it's really hard to pin people down, and people don't often know what they want to do, and this is where coaches are really, really important. So, dual career at our university, we enrol all our student athletes onto this dual career programme, and at the start of the year we get them to do an induction. So that's when we talk about things like stress. We get them to talk about a nutrition workshop like you've had today, about obviously what they eat 2 to 4 hours beforehand. We give them fundamentals about all those aspects to kickstart them through the door on their university journey, to hopefully give them some basic skills right at the start. We also get them to sign a student contract, which basically says we understand why education is really important, we understand why we need to attend and do these things, but also here's our sporting contracts. And now we have relationships and partnerships with Canterbury Rugby Club, Canterbury Hockey Club, Kent Cricket, and we've tried to work really closely with closing those gaps, which is why I was sort of wondering about your links with local schools. And for us, that's worked really, really well in ensuring that we have got a really well-built support network around those athletes. We obviously give a range of sports science workshop and dual career workshops, and we each assign, we have an academic tutor, and we also have a sports mentor at the university for every single one of our sports scholarship students. We have 48 of them, potentially 50 for next year, ranging from Olympic level athletes all the way down to county level rugby. So that's the sort of people that we count from talented all the way up to extremely elite. So what we do offer them, and I think this is something that could be learnt from in terms of your practice at your club level, is ongoing monitoring. We sit down with them formally 3 times a year and see how that lifestyle wheel changes. We see how their goals have changed, and from there we can build a picture of how best to support support them on a day-to-day basis, but also in the long run. So planning from the end of the season, what do we need to do when we're thinking about the start of the season to come? Okay, so it might be the case that you simply think about, okay, well, do I actually want to sit with my players a little bit more how they would do further up that talent pathway? But even just having that sit-down conversation with a group of 5 of them who you know at the same school, sit down with them and just see throughout the year, a couple of times, how that changes. Ask from their sports point of view, what are their rugby-related goals? Ask about their education-related goals. Have those really honest conversations with them. Could be one-to-one if you notice somebody is struggling, or if you hear they're struggling at school, or it could just be a little bit more of a group-based thing. So, this is what we do. We identify basically the moment they come in, what their support networks are and what we need, the gaps we need to fill. So, for example, at your club, you might not have access to an education officer, but what is really important to know is if you're in a certain place, if you're in the PDG level of the pathway, each of your clubs should have access to an RFU education officer. Do you know who that is? Judging by that, that's a no. Okay. One thing to do to go away from here, and it's actually on the take-home message, is those of you that have athletes in that PDG and above, which is the level here, sort of your 14, 15-year-olds who are in the player development group and above, every single one of your clubs should have access to an independent RFU education officer. And I would strongly suggest those of you that are ever in doubt about education pathways for your youngsters, find out who that person is. Contact Dan, contact Andy, contact Alistair, find out that point of contact. We maintain regular awareness, so even if you do those 3 pinch points meetings a year, as formal or informal as you like, on a piece of paper, or even get them to do it, but the big thing is actually getting them to be really self-aware, and also getting them to be really honest with you. Now you have to gauge the person in front of you, and whether or not you need to do it individually, or whether or not you think they're just going to write something because their mate sat next to them. So really think about how you would structure that meeting to get the honesty out of them, and really have a conversation that's quite meaningful in terms of giving them direction. Remember, as a coach, in that age group of their lifespan, from the diagram I showed you, coaches are pivotal influencers at that stage. Arguably, sometimes a little bit more than parents, depending on where that kid has come from. Sit yourself down and really think, okay, these are the skill sets that I can give that person as well. We individualise for everyone. Not everybody's the same. We never want to, we always want to make sure that if we feel like we don't have the knowledge, we know where to signpost them elsewhere. So your education officer is a starting point. We were having conversations about knowing about Kent Sport access. If you want access to sports science support, wider access to gym facilities and things like that for your talented cohort, be aware of who to approach at your local council, your Kent County Council, your local based council. See how that scheme works. See how to access that funding, at what points in the year you can do that. And also for those more local bids, things like your big lottery funding, for example, where you can apply for a few £1,000s at a time for your club or for your area, but quite often with those you need a bit of background work. So think about, well, who can I access from the RFU to help me do that and put that bid together? And that's really, really important. My last thing on here is obviously what we do with dual career at our place is really integrate our enterprising opportunities and employability skills. So how many of you are teachers at your clubs? Any teachers? Okay, what other sort of jobs do we have? Shout them out at me, only if you want to.
Graphic design.
Graphic design, okay. What else have we got? Mechanic. What else have we got? Cool, anything else? Must be, come on people. Cow farmer. Right, okay.
Finance.
Say that again? Finance. Okay, right. Any more? Throw them at me. I just need like 5 more.
Sales.
Salaries? Sales. Right. Yeah.
I work for a company that works as a charity as well, so I love the car scrapyard.
Okay.
But it rehabilitates offenders and homes them and provides meals for people as well.
Okay. How often do you network with your players, so even forget about your own age group right now, but older age groups? How many of you actually network and talk genuinely about what you do and opportunities for your youngsters? So maybe like once, twice a year. How many of you actually have some conversations? Think about you going through your journey. I reckon a lot of you are actually have been in a sporting pathway yourself potentially, maybe. Like maybe you've been sort of through the rugby things yourself and where you are now. They can learn a lot from you, okay? So even if you have a player who's in the first team and what they might do for a job, think about opening up those network opportunities for your youngsters. They're coming up to 15, 16, a key transition. They have to decide whether or not they're going to college, what sports, what teams they might end up going to. They need to decide, obviously, in the next couple of years, they've got a lot of pressure on them to make a lot of decisions, okay? Think about what skill set you have at your club and how you can really utilise that to its maximum. So I get key speakers in from a range of different job roles, a range of different companies, to really open up the opportunities for our sports scholarship athletes to see potentially how to either just improve to help their sport, or generally give them a point of contact to help improve their skill set for a career outside of sport. So I've done these ones, sorry. Okay, so in terms of application, here's some vision, give you some background behind what the RFU Academies Manager is currently looking at, so for Don Barrell. His vision is for the academies to be a world-class programme model whereby every club develops its own identity, every player has their own plan, and that helps them to become one of the world's best players. He also thinks that the discipline of having something to do outside of rugby provides you with further perspective and a drive moving forward. And he wants them to be able to make the decisions to adapt. So for them, dual career is really being pushed at the moment in the RFU. It's only an emerging thing in terms of a range of other sports and research in the area, but the RFU is really trying to pull together, and I'm going to show you a few things they're doing. So at the highest level in the academies and the EPDG level, which some of your students or your players might be on, has anyone got any EPDG players in the room, in their cohorts? No? Do you think you... Okay, so there's a few. So those ones who are sort of like DPP level and just above that, they're actually being encouraged by Saracens, and the key message here is, and through the academy pathway, is support the athletes in the education direction they want to go. That is the key message that's being driven from the RFU down. So what we don't want to do is just think, okay, as a coach, I'm just going to send my player to the college down the road that just says it's the best option. Really think, okay, I actually want to look at the college options if my students are talking to me, and kind of think, okay, well, what's out there? And a big way to know about that is go to your RFU education officer as well. Players at this level, also, it's mandatory now for players who are in the EPD or contracted players to have to do a certain amount of further study and professional development whilst they're in the game, okay? And that's becoming really, that's a compulsory thing now, otherwise clubs get fined. Think about, as well, when they do this, they have individualised development plans for each of those individuals. It starts off with that same life wheel that you wrote today, okay? And that's pivotal. And then last but not least, they have every year, at the start of every year, they have a meeting between the parent, the player, and the teacher. Now, you might not have the luxury and the time and the links to do that, but you can start doing that at your club, just with you, the player, and the coach, or just you and the players, and potentially, if you're lucky enough to have a teacher from a local school in your setup, invite them into that system to just sort of begin to discuss what that year ahead is going to look like for them to balance their sport and their studies. So, here's some of my tips in terms of what I've experienced in terms of looking at a dual career athlete in action. So from the age of when he arrived to us at 14 years old on the left, all the way through to when he was 19. There's a complex interplay of factors, but understanding immediately who they have around them, their family, what access to coaches, what access to other support, so like their sports science, their physio stuff, knowing that and potentially where the conflicts are going to be is incredibly important. There's nothing stopping you from doing that at club-based level to help your young athlete get the best out of both worlds, especially if you know someone either struggles academically anyway, or perhaps they really want to achieve more things in their sporting side of things, but they're struggling to balance it all. Everyone's different. Understand what our limits are in our resources in order to think, okay, well, what do I really need? What do I think my individuals need at my club? That might then push for you to then think, okay, well, I need to get some workshops in this, or I need to just help them by improving in my coach and my ability to reflect as a coach. Things like that. Clearly outline our roles and responsibilities. One thing I found really useful with someone like Charlie is getting him to continuously do self-check-ins. So getting him to continuously think about what he's doing well in his areas of his life. And then getting him to look back and comparing that to him 6 months ago and a year ago and looking at where he's come. We don't do that often enough with our players, even from the ages of 12 all the way through until when he was 19. You can do that really early on, but just use more simplified language. Think about just the simple messages you're trying to get them to think about, but don't overcomplicate it. Like Seb was sort of saying earlier about then they're sort of too busy thinking about stuff that doesn't really matter, but just get them to think about where they've progressed in their journey so far. That for them is a win. Be there to listen. That will then help them to know what they actually want to do, and then that helps understand their feelings and then understand their direction moving forward. So just be there as a listening ear. Give that ownership to them. What's really important is what we know from resilience and psychology-based research in sport is that young athletes' perceptions of the support network around them is incredibly important and a huge influencing factor with how well your youngsters do in combining their sport and their education. And we know that if they have a good perception that you care about the support structure, that you're thinking about it and you're thinking about and have their best interests at heart, their ability to actually succeed in all those areas and balance them is incredibly much higher than it would have been without it. So, these are 6 areas that I want you to think about. Important factors for you. Think about your ability to manage your relationships with your individual. Think about what you can do at your club, okay, and your organisation. So can you get your individuals who are in finance, who are in sales, who are in mechanics? Can you think about grouping these people together to maximise the type of skill sets that you as people and coaches have that you can feed forward to your players for the future? That's incredibly important. Also at your organisations, think about how you structure your meetings with your, or just want to have improved chats with your players over the years. It might help retention at your clubs, but it also, if it helps like talent pathway, no doubt those people will come back at some point and feed back into your system as role models, and that's incredibly important from supporting a sport in society type thing. Be aware of your student athlete's environment. So even doing those lifestyle wheels should increase your awareness instantly at that point in time what your young players are going through right now. So if you do it in a group of people, be aware that they might not be really honest with you. Think about the dynamics that you have with that player. Be aware of your own ability to communicate. But when you do have that circle, obviously just think about, okay, well, how am I going to get the best answers from them that are really truthful? I don't really have those problems when I work with really elite level athletes, say at GB boxers who've just come back from winning gold at the Youth Olympic Games. They are truly honest with me in a one-to-one scenario because they know and there's trust that whatever they say on there, we will then go away and look at the best possible outcomes. And that's where if you give case study examples from your club, from athletes you know, getting role models in to see where they've gone, the buy-in for that is much, much better as in getting truthful answers to direct how you support them forwards. Reflection and self-management, that is about you as practitioners. So thinking about how reflective are you? Hopefully you listen to Seb's thing, and I was already thinking when I coach, when I'm actually, because I'm not really, I'm an applied practitioner first and foremost, when I coach, how many cues am I giving them to how many are then subsequently being lost in that system, okay? So think about your reflection. There's something called reflective action plan. So it's a really simple coaching tool, and it's just it's been used in education a lot, and basically it's just a little circle and it's a diagram that helps you as a coach. It's a 4-stage model. If you want to use that, you can. It allows you to critically look back at your coaching practice about you. Empowerment is something we're going to go on to now. So the key messages from today, because I'm conscious it's lunchtime. Take some time out, consider your role in how you support at this stage in your club and what you're doing and how you could improve it. It's the things that can easily be overlooked. So something I like to call positive pollution. So what are the best opportunities you are providing at your club for giving increased networking, telling your students about options with local colleges, universities, apprenticeship schemes, going out into the workplace? What are you showing them? Are you showing them anything that's on offer? Give a positive environment. And then obviously things beyond that. Think about really reinforcing and making sure that they know it's okay, that dual career for one athlete does not look the same as it does for another. We are all so incredibly different, and that's why having role models is incredibly important, and almost signposting different athletes at your clubs to different people. You know each other so well where you are in your setups. Think about who might work well with who. Almost like a mentoring type thing within your own club is really important. Keep as many in the game as possible. Okay, that's what I was talking about with this active strategy. If you can make these very, very small changes, potentially it might keep someone at your club level for much, much longer in the game, aids that retention, but it also might help them with moving up that pathway. Embrace the complexities of a teenager's life. How many of you have teenage kids? Okay, right. How many of you go through constant fighting matches? Mood swings? Yeah. So literally, Charlie will probably be cross with me saying this, but I did coach him for 5 years, so it's fine. Some days he would storm through the door, and obviously being a female S&C coach with a young male, there would be some quite fraught conversations. But when he used to walk through the door, he'd be like, no, I'm going to be honest now, because you've always told me to be honest. And he'd be like, I don't want to be here today. I've got all this other shit to do. I've got so much stuff to get on with. Sometimes I would just embrace it and think, okay, well, how are we going to work work around this. So actually, I changed my diary on those particular weeks where he really would come in, he was super stressed out. We made changes, and it wasn't because he was being difficult, maybe he just didn't deal with those things the best, but we tried to then look at those skill sets, get him to deal with them a little bit better, but I just knew that there would be those times where you have to contend with them. So ultimately, did those things and me adapting, or us adapting as an environment in conjunction with Saracens, with his school, and with us as a wider partner working with him, if we didn't all make those small changes in that triangle, I don't know if he would still be where he is, and if he would still get his place at his university setting, if he would have got offered a full-time contract. I don't know, I can't tell you, but we did the best for him at that time. Be aware of your potential key transitions, those key points. So look at that diagram, see when somebody goes from secondary school education potentially into college or sixth form. Be aware of when that's going to happen. Try and look back 3-6 months in advance at the end of your season in order to try and think, okay, well, what can I do to help that person transition, to make sure that they don't drop out of my club pathway and they come back to me in sixth form, okay? So that's a really key thing. Increase players' self-awareness of their own transferable skills. How many of you think that your players, you said it before, your players aren't confident? And you've said that about a performance point of view. Okay, I can tell you most young athletes, I interviewed GB Alpine skiers as part of the research project I was talking about earlier, doing all those different things. They didn't even realise that the skills they have gained through being a sports person, they did not translate that to the real world. So we're talking about a young girl, 17 years old, about to go again off to the Youth Olympic Winter Games. She had no idea that she was managing at 17 years old. She was managing her parents really well. She had no idea that she was doing that really well. She was managing to organise her social media, writing letters to sponsors. I don't know many 17-year-olds that can do that. So she might not have been most academically able as a student, but her ability to get on in life and have those wider skills was incredible. I could not have done that at 17 years old. She wasn't even aware. So when you see that in your players, really reinforce it, okay? Listen to your athlete voice and develop that group identity. So the main take-homes and things that I would definitely suggest that you think about looking at your club are: identify your main academic and your sporting pinch points for your individuals to plan your year ahead. Try and plan 3 to 6 months in advance. Ongoing communications. So how many of you have come across RPE, so the rate of perceived exertion scale? It's a sports science thing. Has anyone heard of it? Coaches for the higher levels? No? Okay, so rate of perceived exertion is a really quick way that sports scientists or someone like Seb and his team would gauge the intensity of either a rugby session or a strength and conditioning session. So you say, right, out of 10 being really hard, one being really easy, how do you rate the intensity or difficulty of that session? They give you a number, and that's often done in sports science to gauge how hard and the intensity of which you find it. I would do exactly the same on a weekly basis, but I would ask your players at the start of the week, just how are you feeling, and tell me out of 10, how are you finding school at the moment? How are you finding the rugby? Things like that, okay? And if you feel like you can't ask them about their rugby, maybe you've got a manager or somebody in the setup or a safeguarding or welfare officer at the club that could actually be signposted to have those conversations with your young players. Involve your young athlete voice at your club. So this has been instrumental to the success of how our students and our athletes are progressing at the university. How many of you invite some of your young athletes to be as part of your boards that you have at your rugby club, or when you have like your AGMs? Anyone? No? What do you think about that? Really quickly, sorry, I'm conscious it's lunch, I'm really sorry. You think that's a no?
It's bad, you need to involve them. They need their input.
Yes, so yeah, oh yeah, so you're saying it's bad to involve them. I was like, no. Yeah, perfect. So if nobody currently has that student, that young person's voice, think about how you can actually get that across at your club. And that could be, obviously, you will need to guide that. That will take some thought. I'm happy if you want to chat about that and how we do it at the university, that our athletes feed back into our system and actually tell us how we can improve as coaches, academics, mentors. We get all that feedback from them, but we have to kind of structure it so we actually get them to tell us those things. Really put that at your club and make sure that they feel that they're involved in that process moving forward. Know your RFU education officer, and also be inquisitive about your academic flexibility options at school. So if lots of you are parents, I would have a string of questions when you go, if your kid's looking to transition from like your lower school into your sixth form and your colleges, have a list of questions about what are the academic flexibility options. If they need an extension on a deadline because they get called up to a higher level, what are the options? What about if your student student has, or your players have additional learning needs, ask them about all the things that are in place at that school that could really help. Don't be afraid about presenting that. In the next few years, most schools and colleges will probably have to get that Sport England stamp, so it's going to become the norm. And then, last but not least, use those role models to show a variety of dual career pathways, okay? That can be a player from Tunbridge Judds, who literally might be a cow farmer, all right? That can be that person's pathway, and that might work really well for somebody else. And depending on his journey, he might have really struggled in education, for example, I don't know. But show what that looks like and show the options for how somebody would get into that. The other things are your, sort of your mechanics, your finance, your sales. Show those options. Show it from an elite perspective, but also show them role models that are more relatable. So I'll leave it on this note, and like I said, feel free to come and ask me any questions. This is from the RFU, this is directly from Don Barrell. Support people in their own environment. So don't change their education, or don't force them down an education route that just fits with the rugby at the time. Really think about what's going to keep them in for longer, and try and find as many options that are suited to that person in front of you. But unless you speak to them, unless you're reflective, unless you think about their voice, you might not know a lot of those things. Cool. Has anyone got any questions?